Commander Jake Morrison knew he was going to die when the Valkyrie warship locked onto his fighter. His instruments screamed warnings as the alien vessel's targeting systems painted him with hostile intent. The rest of his squadron was scattered across the asteroid field, engaged in their own desperate battles. Phoenix 7, you've got 3 seconds before they fire, his co-pilot Lisa Grant said from the seat behind him. Her voice stayed calm despite the proximity alarms drowning out everything else. Jake didn't respond. He was too busy calculating angles that didn't exist, looking for an escape route that mathematics said wasn't there. The Valkyrie didn't miss. Their weapons technology was 300 years ahead of humanity's best efforts. Everyone knew it. The war had proven it over and over for the past 2 years. Jake. Lisa's voice cut through his concentration. I know. He jerked the controls hard left, pushing the fighter into a spin that would have killed them both if the inertial dampeners failed. They didn't fail. But it didn't matter. The Valkyrie ship adjusted its aim with impossible precision. That's not what I was going to say. Lisa reached forward and put her hand on his shoulder. Remember what you told me at the officers' club last week? Jake's mind raced backward, even as his hands worked the controls on pure instinct. The officers' club. They'd been drinking. She'd asked him a hypothetical question about marriage, something playful and light in the middle of a war that was anything but. He'd laughed and said he'd say yes if she proposed. Just a joke between friends who might not live to see tomorrow. I remember, he said. The Valkyrie weapon charged. Jake could see the energy buildup on his sensors. 1.3 seconds until it fired. No human had ever survived a direct hit from a Valkyrie plasma lance. Then say yes, Lisa whispered. Into the comm. Jake's brain stuttered. What? Say yes, Jake. We're about to die and you're actually proposing right now? Yes or no, Commander. The absurdity of it hit him like a physical force. Here they were, about to be vaporized by an alien warship. And Lisa Grant was asking him to marry her. Not hypothetically. Not as a joke. For real. He started laughing. Not the nervous laughter of a man facing death, but genuine amusement at the sheer audacity of the woman behind him. If they were going to die, at least they'd die doing something memorable. Yes, he said. The Valkyrie weapon fired. Jake slammed every control forward simultaneously, a maneuver called the Denver flip that was technically illegal because it exceeded the fighter's safety parameters by a factor of 4. The ship screamed in protest. Metal groaned. The inertial dampeners flickered and failed for a fraction of a second, just long enough for them both to feel the full force of the acceleration. The plasma lance missed them by 17 meters. Jake didn't have time to celebrate. The moment they cleared the shot, he redirected all power to engines and punched the fighter toward the nearest asteroid. The Valkyrie ship began to turn, preparing for another shot. But Jake had bought them precious seconds. You actually said yes, Lisa said. You actually proposed while we were being shot at, Jake replied, threading the fighter between 2 massive rocks that were slowly tumbling toward each other. Seemed like good timing. You have terrible timing. But you said yes. Jake couldn't argue with that. He cut the engines and let momentum carry them into the shadow of a particularly large asteroid, hiding them from the Valkyrie's sensors. His hands were shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. His whole body was shaking. Why? He asked. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Because I wanted you to have something to live for, beyond just surviving the next 5 minutes. Because I've been in love with you since the academy. Because we might die tomorrow or the next day or an hour from now, and I didn't want to die without asking. Jake stared at the instruments in front of him, watching for any sign that the Valkyrie had found them again. His heart was pounding. And not just from the near-death experience. That's actually the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, he admitted. Does that mean the yes still stands? If we survive this mission, Jake said, I'll marry you on the flight deck of the carrier with everyone watching. Deal, Lisa said. The Valkyrie warship passed by their hiding spot, searching for them among the asteroids. Jake waited, counting seconds. knowing they had minutes at best before they were found again. But now, those minutes felt different. Now they meant something more than just survival. The Valkyrie warship continued its search pattern for another 7 minutes before giving up and moving to engage other human fighters. Jake waited an additional 3 minutes after that, making sure it wasn't a trap, before powering up their systems again. Phoenix, 7 to Phoenix Leader, he said into the comm. We're still alive. Good to hear your voice, 7. Commander Henry Walsh's voice crackled back. We thought we'd lost you. Get back to the rally point. The mission's a bust. We're pulling back to the Endeavor. Jake acknowledged and set course for the designated coordinates. Around them, the asteroid field continued its slow, eternal dance, indifferent to the war being fought among its rocks. He could see the debris of at least 3 human fighters scattered in the distance, twisted metal reflecting starlight. How many did we lose? Lisa asked quietly. I don't know yet. Jake didn't want to know. Every pilot who didn't make it back was someone he'd trained with, flown with, shared drinks with. The mathematics of war were brutal. Humanity was losing. Slowly. Inevitably. Losing. The Valkyrie had appeared 2 years ago without warning or provocation. Their first action was to destroy Mars Colony 3, killing 16,000 people in an instant. Their second action was to issue an ultimatum. Surrender all human territory beyond Earth's moon or face extinction. Humanity's response was predictable. They fought. It was a fight they were losing. The Valkyrie technology was simply too advanced. Their ships were faster. Their weapons stronger. Their shields impenetrable. Every battle was a desperate struggle just to slow them down, to buy time for the evacuation of the outer colonies. Earth's military had thrown everything they had at the invaders, and barely made a dent. Penny for your thoughts, Lisa said as they cleared the asteroid field. Jake glanced at the small screen showing her face. She looked tired. They all looked tired. Just thinking about how we're going to plan a wedding in the middle of a war. Small ceremony. Just close friends. No need to make it complicated. Lisa, we don't have close friends anymore. They keep dying. The words came out harsher than he intended. But she didn't flinch. She understood. They all understood. The mortality rate for fighter pilots was 63%. Most didn't survive their first year of combat. Jake and Lisa had beaten the odds for 18 months now. But odds had a way of catching up eventually. Then we'll invite the new pilots, Lisa said firmly. Give them something hopeful to look forward to. Show them that life goes on, even in the middle of all this death. Jake considered that. Maybe she was right. Maybe hope was a weapon too. In its own way. God knew they needed every weapon they could get. The rally point came into view. A cluster of human fighters forming up around the massive bulk of the Earth Defense Force, carrier, Endeavor. The carrier was scarred from dozens of battles, its hull patched and repatched so many times it looked like a quilt. But it was still flying. Still fighting. That had to count for something. They docked in the fighter bay without incident. The moment Jake popped the canopy, he was hit by the familiar sounds and smells of the bay. Mechanics shouting, welding torches sparking, the acrid scent of burned fuel and hot metal. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos. Everyone knew their job. Lisa climbed out of her seat and dropped to the deck beside him. She was shorter than he remembered, barely reaching his shoulder. Strange how he could forget that, when they were both strapped into a fighter. So, she said, are we really doing this? Jake looked at her. Really looked at her. Brown eyes that had seen too much death. Dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that was coming loose. A scar on her left cheek from a crash landing 3 months ago. She was beautiful in the way that people became beautiful when you knew you might lose them at any moment. Yeah, he said. We're really doing this. Commander Walsh found them before they'd even left the flight deck. He was a tall man with gray hair, and the kind of face that seemed permanently set in a concerned frown. Morrison. Grant. Debrief in 10 minutes. Don't be late. Yes, sir. they said in unison. Walsh started to walk away, then paused and turned back. Glad you two made it. We lost 6 fighters today. Phoenix 2, 4, 8, 11, 13, and 15. He rattled off the numbers like a grocery list. But Jake could see the weight behind his eyes. The Valkyrie are pushing harder. Intelligence thinks they're preparing for a major offensive. Against what target? Jake asked. Earth. Walsh said it flatly, without emotion. They're done playing with the colonies. They want the homeworld. And they think they're ready to take it. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Earth, humanity's birthplace. 8 billion people who couldn't evacuate, couldn't run, couldn't hide. If the Valkyrie reached Earth with their full force, it would be a slaughter. When? Lisa asked. Best guess is 3 weeks, maybe 4 if we're lucky. Walsh's frown deepened. Fleet Command is pulling every ship back to Sol System. Every pilot, every soldier, every resource we have left. Jake felt his stomach drop. 3 weeks. 4 at most. That was all the time they had left. Dismissed, Walsh said, and walked away. Lisa grabbed Jake's hand. Her grip was tight, almost painful. I heard. Then we get married tomorrow. Jake looked at her sharply. Tomorrow? Why wait? You said if we survived the mission, you'd marry me on the flight deck. Well, we survived. So let's do it. Her voice was fierce, determined. If the world's ending in 3 weeks, I want to spend those 3 weeks as your wife. It was crazy. It was impulsive. It was absolutely insane. Okay, Jake said. Lisa blinked. Really? Really? Tomorrow? Flight deck. Everyone invited. He squeezed her hand back. But first, we need to survive the debrief. The debrief was as painful as expected. They sat in a small room with the other surviving pilots and went over everything that had happened during the mission. The Valkyrie had ambushed them in the asteroid field, cutting off their approach to the supply depot they were supposed to hit. The attack had been coordinated, precise, and devastating. The aliens had known exactly where the human squadron would be. They're learning our tactics, Walsh said grimly, adapting faster than we can adjust. The old strategies aren't working anymore. Then we need new strategies, Jake said. Like what, Morrison? Jake hesitated. He'd been thinking about this for weeks now, ever since he'd started noticing patterns in the Valkyrie behavior. They're predictable, he said slowly. Their technology is better than ours, so they don't bother with unpredictability. They do the mathematically optimal thing every time. Every single time. How does that help us? Another pilot asked. The mathematically optimal thing usually involves us dying. It helps us because humans don't do the mathematically optimal thing. Lisa interjected, catching on to what Jake was suggesting. We do stupid things. Reckless things. Things that don't make sense. Walsh leaned forward, interested now. Jake stood up and walked to the tactical display on the wall. The Denver flip saved our lives today. It's a technically illegal maneuver that violates every safety protocol. No sane pilot would do it in actual combat because the risk of mechanical failure is too high. But the Valkyrie didn't predict it because their combat algorithms probably don't account for pilots deliberately putting their own ships at risk. You want us to fight crazy, Walsh said. I want us to fight human, Jake corrected. The Valkyrie are logical. Precise. Perfect. We need to be the opposite. Chaotic. Unpredictable. Willing to take risks that their computers would never calculate as viable options. The room fell silent as everyone considered this. It was risky. It was dangerous. It would probably get a lot of people killed. But they were already dying anyway. Walsh nodded slowly. I'll pass it up the chain. No promises. But it's the first new tactical idea I've heard in months that doesn't involve us just throwing more bodies at the problem. He stood up. Dismissed. Get some rest. We've got another patrol in 8 hours. As they filed out of the debrief room, Lisa leaned close to Jake. "So," she whispered, "tomorrow. You really meant it?" "Every word," Jake said. "Find a chaplain. Spread the word. We're getting married on the flight deck at 1400 hours. The next morning arrived with the usual alarm at 0500 hours. Jake woke from restless dreams filled with plasma fire and exploding fighters. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was. Then reality snapped back into focus. The carrier. His bunk. The war. And today, apparently, his wedding day. He lay there for a minute, staring at the metal ceiling of his quarters, trying to process the surreal nature of it all. In a few hours, he would be married. To Lisa Grant, in the middle of a war that humanity was losing, while the Valkyrie prepared to assault Earth itself. "This is insane," he said aloud to the empty room. But he got up anyway, showered in the cramped bathroom, and put on his dress uniform. The dark blue jacket felt strange after months of wearing nothing but flight suits. The medals on his chest seemed heavy. Each one, a reminder of battles survived and friends lost. Someone knocked on his door. "Come in," Jake called. Commander Walsh entered, looking uncomfortable in his own dress uniform. "Morrison. Heard you're getting married today." 17 start. "Yes, sir. 1400 hours. That's in 6 hours. Walsh studied him. "You sure about this?" "No, sir. But I'm doing it anyway." Walsh's stern expression cracked into something that might have been a smile. "Good answer. Permission to attend the ceremony?" "Permission granted, sir. Also, Fleet Command reviewed your tactical proposal from yesterday." Walsh's expression turned serious again. "They're implementing it across all squadrons. Operation Chaos, they're calling it. Every human pilot is being retrained to fight unpredictably, to take risks, to be human instead of trying to match the Valkyrie's precision." Jake felt a surge of something that might have been hope. "When does it start?" "Tomorrow. But today, you get married." Walsh headed for the door, then paused. "Morrison, for what it's worth, I think Grant's good for you. You're both lucky to have found each other in the middle of all this hell." "Thank you, sir." After Walsh left, Jake sat on his bunk and tried to steady his nerves. He'd flown combat missions against impossible odds. He'd watched friends die. He'd come within seconds of his own death more times than he could count. But somehow, the thought of standing in front of everyone and saying wedding vows terrified him more than any of that. His comm unit beeped. A message from Lisa. "No cold feet allowed. See you at 1400. Jake smiled despite himself and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. The morning passed in a blur. There was a patrol mission scheduled, but Walsh had reassigned it to other pilots. "Can't have the groom dying on his wedding day," he'd said. Instead, Jake spent the time helping the mechanics prep fighters and trying not to think too hard about what he was about to do. At 1330 hours, he made his way to the flight deck. Someone, probably Lisa, had organized everything. The flight deck had been cleared of all unnecessary equipment. A small podium had been set up in the center, and chairs were arranged in rows facing it. Decorations hung from the overhead support streamers made from emergency reflective tape and flowers constructed from colored wiring. It was improvised and makeshift and perfect. Pilots filled the seats, at least 100 of them from various squadrons stationed on the Endeavour. Mechanics and engineers lined the walls. Even some of the bridge crew had come down. Everyone wore their dress uniforms, a sea of dark blue punctuated by the bright colors of the improvised decorations. Jake took his place at the podium next to Chaplain Rivera, an older woman with kind eyes who'd been with the fleet since the war began. She smiled at him reassuringly. "Nervous?" she asked. "Terrified," Jake admitted. "That's normal. Take deep breaths." At exactly 1400 hours, music began playing from someone's portable speaker. It was an old song, something classical that Jake vaguely recognized. Everyone stood and turned toward the entrance. Lisa appeared at the far end of the flight deck. Jake's breath caught. She wore her dress uniform too, but somehow she made it look elegant. Her hair was down for once, falling past her shoulders in dark waves. She carried a small bouquet of the wire flowers, and her smile was radiant. She walked down the improvised aisle alone, head held high, eyes locked on Jake's. When she reached the podium, she handed the bouquet to another pilot and took Jake's hands in hers. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he whispered back. Chaplain Rivera cleared her throat. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses to join Jake Morrison and Lisa Grant in holy matrimony." Her voice carried across the flight deck, formal and solemn. "In the middle of darkness, we celebrate light. In the middle of war, we celebrate love. In the middle of death, we celebrate life." Jake squeezed Lisa's hands. She squeezed back. The ceremony proceeded with traditional vows. Jake meant every word he spoke, even though his voice shook. Lisa's voice was steady and clear, her eyes never leaving his face. "Do you, Jake Morrison, take Lisa Grant to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Jake said. "Do you, Lisa Grant, take Jake Morrison to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do. By the power vested in me by the Earth Defense Force, and in accordance with the laws of humanity, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Rivera smiled. "You may kiss the bride." Jake leaned forward and kissed Lisa, while the entire flight deck erupted in cheers and applause. Someone set off a confetti cannon, probably unauthorized, and bits of colored paper rained down on them. Lisa laughed against his lips, and Jake thought that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. The celebration afterwards was improvised but heartfelt. Someone had smuggled actual alcohol onto the carrier, a violation of regulations that everyone chose to ignore for the day. There was music and dancing and food that was only slightly better than the standard rations. People gave toasts that ranged from sentimental to hilariously inappropriate. Commander Walsh raised his glass. "To Jake and Lisa, may your marriage last longer than the rest of us probably will." "To Jake and Lisa," everyone chorused, then laughed at the dark humor of it. Jake held Lisa close as they danced to another old song playing from the speaker. "Thank you," he said into her ear. "For what?" "For proposing. For giving me something to fight for beyond just survival. You would have fought anyway. That's who you are. Maybe. But now, I'm fighting for our future. For the life we're going to have after this war ends." "You think it will end?" Lisa asked quietly. Jake thought about Operation Chaos, about fighting unpredictably, about being human in a war against perfect machines. "I think we have a chance," he said. "The Valkyrie are counting on us being predictable. They're counting on us following the logical patterns of warfare. But we're human. We don't have to be logical. We can be brave and foolish and reckless. We can do things that don't make sense on paper but somehow work anyway, like proposing during combat. Exactly like that." They danced for hours, surrounded by friends and fellow pilots who might not live to see another week. But for today, for this moment, they were all alive and together, and celebrating something good in the middle of terrible darkness. At 2000 hours, an alarm sounded throughout the carrier. Everyone froze. That alarm meant one thing: enemy contact. Commander Walsh was already moving toward the exit. "All pilots to your stations. This is not a drill." The celebration dissolved in seconds. Pilots ran for the ready room to get briefed. Mechanics scrambled to prep fighters. The music cut off abruptly, replaced by the harsh sounds of a ship preparing for combat. Jake and Lisa ran together, still in their dress uniforms. There wasn't time to change. In the ready room, the tactical display showed what they were facing. 3 Valkyrie warships had appeared at the edge of the system, moving toward the Endeavor's position at high speed. Not a full assault force, but enough to overwhelm a single carrier if they weren't stopped. "They found us," Walsh said grimly. "All squadrons launch immediately. Standard combat formation." He paused, then corrected himself. "No, not standard. Morrison's new tactics. Operation Chaos. Hit them with everything unpredictable. Show them what humans can do." The pilots cheered and ran for their fighters. Jake and Lisa reached Phoenix 7. Neither of them had changed out of their dress uniforms. They looked absurd, medals and ribbons gleaming as they climbed into the cockpit of a war machine. "Some wedding night," Lisa said as she strapped into the rear seat. "Could be worse," Jake replied, running through the pre-flight checklist with practiced efficiency. "How? We could be doing this alone." The fighter bay doors opened, revealing the stars beyond. Dozens of human fighters launched simultaneously, spreading out into a loose formation that would have horrified any traditional military tactician. There was no organization to it, no mathematical precision, just chaos. Perfect. The Valkyrie warships approached in their usual formation. Perfect triangular pattern, weapons charging in synchronized patterns. They were expecting the humans to engage in the standard defensive screen, trying to protect the carrier while minimizing losses. Instead, the human fighters broke into seemingly random attack patterns. Some dove straight at the warships with reckless speed. Others circled wide, approaching from unexpected angles. A few stayed back, then suddenly accelerated forward at full thrust. There was no pattern to it, no predictability. The Valkyrie ships hesitated. It was only a fraction of a second, but Jake saw it. Their weapons didn't fire. Their targeting systems couldn't lock on because they were trying to predict human behavior that was deliberately unpredictable. "All fighters, on my mark, execute Denver flips simultaneously," Jake said into the comm. 3, 2, 1. Mark. 50 human fighters executed the Denver flip at the same instant. The maneuver was illegal for good reason. It subjected the ships and pilots to forces that exceeded every safety parameter. Inertial dampeners flickered and failed across the fleet for crucial seconds. Some pilots blacked out from the acceleration. 2 fighters suffered mechanical failures and had to pull back, but the rest completed the maneuver successfully. And suddenly they were inside the Valkyrie defensive perimeter, moving at impossible angles that no sane pilot would attempt. The alien warships tried to adjust, but their targeting computers couldn't keep up with the chaos. Human fighters wove between them like angry wasps, firing missiles and plasma bursts from point-blank range. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't efficient. 3 more fighters collided with debris and exploded. But it was working. "Target the central ship's port weapons array," Jake called out, identifying a weak point in the Valkyrie defenses. "Hit it with everything." 20 fighters converged on that single point, ignoring the other threats around them. The Valkyrie ship tried to rotate its shields, but the humans were already too close. Missiles impacted in a concentrated barrage that overwhelmed the alien ship's defensive capabilities. The weapons array exploded in a cascade of blue fire. The Valkyrie ship began listing to one side, its perfect formation broken. The other 2 warships tried to compensate, moving to cover their damaged companion. But that meant breaking their own formation. And once they broke formation, they became vulnerable. "Second wave, target the rightmost ship's engines," Commander Walsh's voice crackled over the comm. "Third wave, harass the leftmost ship. Keep them off balance. Don't give them time to think." The battle dissolved into beautiful chaos. Human fighters darted in and out, never staying in one place long enough for the Valkyrie targeting systems to lock on. They took risks that made no tactical sense. They deliberately damaged their own ships with aggressive maneuvers. They acted like humans, instead of trying to be perfect machines. Jake pushed Phoenix 7 through a corkscrew spiral that brought them underneath the damaged Valkyrie ship. Lisa was calling out targets from the rear seat, her voice calm despite the violent maneuvers. Shield generator, at heading 270. It's exposed. Jake didn't question her assessment. He lined up the shot and fired a full salvo of missiles. The projectiles streaked across the gap and impacted directly on the shield generator. The explosion was satisfying a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded their sensors. Direct hit, Lisa confirmed. Their shields are down to 60% capacity. Around them, other human fighters pressed the advantage. The Valkyrie ships were designed for perfect, coordinated warfare. They weren't prepared for the messy, chaotic, utterly human style of combat being thrown at them. Their weapons fired in predictable patterns. Their shields oriented toward the mathematically most likely threat vectors. The humans simply ignored those threat vectors and attacked from impossible angles. A Valkyrie plasma lance burned past Phoenix 7, close enough that Jake could see the energy crackling along their hull. Warning alarms screamed. Lisa was already working the damage control systems before Jake could even think to check them. Starboard shield emitter is fried, she reported. We're exposed on that side. Then we don't let them hit that side, Jake said, and threw the fighter into another aggressive roll. The battle raged for 17 minutes. By the end of it, the damaged Valkyrie ship was drifting with minimal power, its weapons offline. The other two warships had withdrawn to a safer distance. Reassessing their strategy. They'd expected an easy fight against an inferior opponent. Instead, they'd encountered something their perfect calculations hadn't predicted. Desperation coupled with creativity. All fighters, return to the Endeavor, Walsh ordered. We've got a brief window before they adapt. Use it. The human fighters disengaged and headed back to the carrier. Jake counted them as they flew past. They'd launched with 63 fighters. Only 41 were returning. 22 pilots had died in 17 minutes of combat. But they'd survived. They'd driven off a Valkyrie attack force. For the first time since the war began, humanity had won a decisive tactical victory. The flight deck was a madhouse when they landed. Mechanics swarmed the damaged fighters. Medics rushed to treat injured pilots. Someone was cheering. Someone else was crying. Jake felt numb as he climbed out of Phoenix 7. His dress uniform torn and stained with hydraulic fluid. Lisa dropped down beside him, and they stood together, watching the organized chaos around them. We did it, she said quietly. We lost 22 pilots, Jake replied. But we won. Jake wanted to argue, to point out that losing that many people wasn't winning by any reasonable definition. But Lisa was right, in a way. They'd proven that Operation Chaos worked. They'd shown that humans could fight the Valkyrie on their own terms, and win. It was a small victory in a losing war. But it was still a victory. Commander Walsh found them an hour later in the pilot's lounge. They'd finally changed out of their ruined dress uniforms and into standard duty clothes. Walsh looked exhausted, but there was something like hope in his eyes. Fleet Command watched the entire battle through our tactical feeds, he said. Every carrier in the Sol system is implementing Operation Chaos immediately. You two started something, Morrison. Something that might actually give us a fighting chance. At what cost? Jake asked. Whatever it takes. Walsh's expression hardened. The Valkyrie fleet is 2 weeks out from Earth now. 2 weeks until the biggest battle in human history. Every advantage matters, no matter how small. Your tactics bought us hope. Now we need to figure out how to turn hope into victory. Over the next 10 days, the Endeavor and the rest of the human fleet prepared for the coming battle. Operation Chaos was refined and improved. Pilots practiced aggressive maneuvers until they could execute them in their sleep. New tactics were developed, each one more reckless and unpredictable than the last. Jake and Lisa barely had time to acknowledge that they were married. They flew patrol missions, ran training exercises, and collapsed into their shared quarters for brief periods of exhausted sleep. But sometimes, in the rare, quiet moments, Jake would catch Lisa watching him with a small smile. What? He asked one evening as they sat in the mess hall, picking at their food. Just thinking about how you proposed? she said. You proposed to me. Details. Lisa grinned. I'm thinking about what you said afterwards. That if we survived, you'd marry me on the flight deck with everyone watching. And we did. And then we immediately went back to fighting. Some honeymoon. Jake reached across the table and took her hand. When this is over, when we've beaten the Valkyrie, I'm taking you somewhere with an actual atmosphere. Somewhere with real food and real beds, and no alarm klaxons at 0500 hours. That sounds perfect. Lisa squeezed his hand. But first we have to survive the next week. The Valkyrie fleet arrived in the Sol system exactly 14 days after the wedding, just as intelligence had predicted. They came in force, hundreds of warships, perfectly arrayed in geometric formations that spoke of absolute confidence in their superiority. They'd destroyed Mars Colony 3 with a fraction of this force. Now they brought everything. Earth's defenses were ready. Every carrier, every cruiser, every destroyer that humanity possessed had been pulled back to defend the homeworld. Orbital platforms bristled with weapons. Fighter squadrons numbered in the thousands. Missile batteries covered every possible approach vector. It wasn't going to be enough. Jake knew it. Everyone knew it. The mathematics were simple and brutal. The Valkyrie outgunned them, outmaneuvered them, and outnumbered them. Even with Operation Chaos, even with unpredictability as a weapon, humanity was facing extinction. But they were going to fight anyway. The night before the battle, Jake and Lisa lay together in their quarters, holding each other in the darkness. I don't regret it, Lisa whispered. Proposing to you. Marrying you. Even if tomorrow is the end, I don't regret any of it. Me neither, Jake said. He kissed her forehead. But it's not going to be the end. We're going to win this fight. How can you be so sure? Because we're human, Jake said. We're stupid and reckless, and we never know when to quit. The Valkyrie have better technology, better ships, better weapons. But we have something they don't. What's that? We have each other. We fight for something beyond mathematical calculations and optimal outcomes. We fight for love and hope and the chance at a future. That has to count. For something. The battle began at dawn, Earth time. The Valkyrie fleet advanced in perfect formation, their ships gleaming silver against the black of space. Warning alarms sounded throughout the human fleet. Every pilot, every gunner, every soldier prepared themselves for what might be humanity's last stand. Jake sat in the cockpit of Phoenix 7, Lisa strapped in behind him, both of them running through final pre-flight checks. Around them, thousands of other fighters were doing the same. The flight deck of the Endeavour buzzed with controlled chaos mechanics, making last-minute adjustments. Pilots saying final goodbyes, commanders shouting orders. All squadrons. This is Fleet Admiral Martinez. A voice crackled over the general comm channel. In a few minutes, we're going to engage an enemy that wants to wipe humanity from existence. They think they've already won. They think their superior technology guarantees victory. But they don't understand what it means to be human. They don't understand that we're at our most dangerous, when we have nothing left to lose. Today we fight not just for survival, but for the right to exist. Today we show the Valkyrie what humanity is capable of. All ships, engage at will. Operation Chaos is now active. Show them hell. Chaos. The fleet surged forward. Jake launched Phoenix 7, along with hundreds of other fighters, forming up into the deliberately chaotic formations that had become standard. No neat lines. No predictable patterns. Just organized madness. The Valkyrie opened fire first. Plasma lances and missile salvos filled the space between the two fleets. Human ships began dying immediately. Destroyers torn apart by focused fire. Fighters vaporized by direct hits. The tactical displays lit up with red markers, indicating losses. But the humans didn't try to minimize those losses. They didn't pull back to defensive positions. They accelerated forward, directly into the teeth of the Valkyrie assault, doing exactly what the aliens didn't expect. All fighters, Denver, flip on my mark, Jake called to his squadron. 3, 2, 1. Execute. Phoenix Squadron executed the illegal maneuver in unison, their fighters screaming in protest as they exceeded every safety limit. Jake felt the brief moment of crushing acceleration as the inertial dampeners failed. Then they were through. Inside the Valkyrie formation, moving at angles the aliens hadn't predicted. Target the flagship. Commander Walsh's voice cut through the chaos. Every squadron. Converge on the flagship. Hit it with everything. It was insane. The Valkyrie flagship was the most heavily defended ship in their fleet, protected by layers of shields and surrounded by escort vessels. No rational military commander would order a direct assault on it, which was exactly why Walsh was ordering it. Jake pushed Phoenix 7 toward the massive alien vessel, weaving between plasma fire and exploding missiles. Other human fighters converged from a dozen different directions, none of them following predictable attack patterns. The Valkyrie defenses tried to adapt, but they were designed for logical warfare. They couldn't handle the sheer chaos of human desperation. Shields are concentrating on the forward section, Lisa called out. Their dorsal surface is exposed. Jake didn't hesitate. He yanked the controls up, sending Phoenix 7 into a vertical climb that brought them over the flagship's spine. From this angle, they could see the massive ship stretching out below them, kilometers of alien technology and death, firing all missiles, Jake said, and emptied their entire payload into the flagship's dorsal armor. Hundreds of other fighters were doing the same thing, hitting the flagship from every conceivable angle. The Valkyrie shields flickered under the concentrated assault. Individual missiles couldn't penetrate the armor, but thousands of them hitting simultaneously overwhelmed the defensive systems. An explosion blossomed on the flagship's hull, small at first, then growing, as internal systems began to fail. "We've got a breach," someone shouted over the comm. "Keep hitting them." The Valkyrie fleet tried to regroup, to protect their flagship, but that meant breaking their perfect formations. And once they broke formation, they became vulnerable to the chaotic human assault. Earth's capital ships moved in, their massive guns firing at targets designated by the fighter squadrons. The battle raged for hours. Jake lost track of how many times they narrowly escaped death. Phoenix 7 took hit after hit, systems failing one by one. But the fighter kept flying through sheer, stubborn determination. Lisa worked miracles in the rear seat, rerouting power and keeping them operational long past the point where they should have ejected. The Valkyrie flagship finally died at hour 3. Its shields failed completely, and concentrated fire from a dozen human cruisers tore through its armor. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface, a brief new star in the sky as the alien vessel broke apart. The Valkyrie fleet faltered. For the first time since the war began, Jake saw the aliens hesitate. Their perfect formations wavered. Their coordinated fire patterns became disjointed. They'd built their entire military strategy around mathematical certainty, and humanity had just introduced chaos into their equations. "All ships, press the advantage." Admiral Martinez's voice rang out. "Don't give them time to adapt. Hit them now while they're confused." The human fleet surged forward with renewed fury. They'd lost hundreds of ships already, thousands of lives, but they'd proven something crucial. The Valkyrie could be beaten. Their technology wasn't invincible. Their logic had limitations, and humans were very good at exploiting limitations. Jake pushed Phoenix 7 toward another cluster of Valkyrie ships, his hands steady on the controls despite the exhaustion clawing at him. Beside him, Lisa was singing softly an old song from before the war, something about coming home. It seemed impossibly out of place in the middle of a space battle, but somehow it helped him focus. "Incoming plasma lance," Lisa warned. Jake jerked the controls sideways, and the deadly energy beam missed them by meters. He returned fire with their remaining weapons, targeting the warship's exposed engine ports. Small explosions rippled across the alien vessel's hull. The battle continued. Hour 4. Hour 5. The space around Earth became filled with debris from both sides, twisted metal and frozen bodies tumbling in the void. The tactical displays were a confusing mess of red and blue markers, showing losses and positions that changed by the second. But slowly, gradually, the tide began to turn. The Valkyrie fleet was designed for perfect warfare. It couldn't adapt quickly to imperfect opponents. Every time they calculated a defensive strategy, the humans would do something that made no mathematical sense. Every time they predicted an attack pattern, the humans would attack from a completely illogical direction. By hour 6, the Valkyrie were in full retreat. Their remaining ships disengaged from combat and began accelerating away from Earth, heading for the outer system. The human fleet pursued, harrying them with long-range fire, not giving them any chance to regroup or counterattack. All squadrons, maintain pursuit, Walsh ordered. Don't let them establish a foothold anywhere in the Sol system. Jake followed the command, pushing Phoenix 7's damaged engines to keep up with the fleeing aliens. Around him, the other surviving fighters did the same. They were running on fumes and determination now, their ships held together by emergency patches and prayers. The Valkyrie fleet reached the heliopause and kept going, jumping into faster-than-light travel one ship at a time. They left behind hundreds of wrecked vessels and uncounted dead, but more importantly, they left behind their aura of invincibility. Humanity had won. All fighters, return to your carriers, Walsh said. His voice was rough with emotion. It's over. We did it. Earth is secure. Jake didn't trust himself to respond. He simply turned Phoenix 7 back toward the Endeavor and started the long flight home. The fighter's engines were making alarming noises, and half his instruments were dead, but they were still flying. Jake, Lisa said softly from the rear seat. Yeah, we survived. The simple statement hit him like a physical force. They'd survived, against all odds, through chaos and desperation and sheer human stubbornness. They'd lived through the battle that should have ended humanity. Yeah, Jake said, his voice cracking. We did. The flight deck of the Endeavor was barely recognizable when they finally landed. Damaged fighters were crammed into every available space. Mechanics worked frantically to clear room for new arrivals. Medics rushed between ships, treating wounded pilots. Jake and Lisa climbed out of Phoenix 7 and stood on the deck, looking at each other. They were both covered in sweat and blood, some of it their own, some from the fighter's damaged systems. Lisa's left arm hung at an odd angle, probably broken. Jake's leg wouldn't stop bleeding from a piece of shrapnel that had penetrated the cockpit. But they were alive. Lisa stepped forward and wrapped her good arm around Jake, holding him tight. He held her back, and for a long moment they just stood there on the chaotic flight deck, surrounded by the sounds of survival. We should probably see a medic, Lisa said finally. Probably, Jake agreed. Neither of them moved. Commander Walsh found them like that 10 minutes later. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the past 6 hours. Morrison. Grant. Good work out there. Thank you, sir. The Valkyrie are gone. Long-range sensors show them leaving the system entirely. Intelligence thinks they're heading back to wherever they came from. Walsh allowed himself a small smile. Congratulations. You two helped save humanity. Just doing our job, sir, Jake said. Your job was to fly a fighter. You did a hell of a lot more than that. Walsh gestured toward the medical bay. Now go get patched up. That's an order. You've got a marriage to enjoy, now that the war's over. They made their way to the medical bay, supporting each other. Around them, the Endeavor slowly came back to life. Damage reports were filed. Casualties were counted. Plans were made for recovery and reconstruction. But for Jake and Lisa, all of that could wait. They'd survived the unsurvivable. They'd helped turn the tide when all hope seemed lost. They'd proven that being human, chaotic, unpredictable, occasionally insane, was a strength, not a weakness. And they had a whole future ahead of them now. 2 weeks later, after the injuries had healed and the immediate crisis had passed, Jake and Lisa stood together on the observation deck of the Endeavor, looking down at Earth. The planet was still there, still blue and green and alive. 8 billion people continued their lives, most of them never knowing how close they'd come to extinction. So, Lisa said, leaning against Jake's shoulder, about that honeymoon you promised me. Not, Jake smiled. Somewhere with an actual atmosphere. Real food. Real beds. No alarm klaxons. Definitely no alarm klaxons. Sounds perfect. Lisa turned to face him. But before we do that, I have one more question. What's that? Do you regret saying yes? When I proposed during that fight? Jake thought about it seriously. He thought about the chaos of that moment. The certainty of death. The absurdity of a proposal during combat. He thought about everything that had happened since the wedding on the flight deck. The battles they'd fought together. The way they'd helped change the course of human history. Not for a second, he said. Good, Lisa said. Because I'm not done proposing crazy ideas to you yet. Jake laughed and kissed her. There on the observation deck, with Earth spinning below them, and the stars spreading out above. They'd survived the war. They'd found each other in the middle of chaos and death, and now they had the rest of their lives to figure out what came next. It was the best ending he could have imagined, and somehow, despite everything, it felt like a beginning.